Hey everybody, welcome to another episode of Courtside with Beilinson Tennis, part of the Tennis Channel Podcast Network. As always, have with me my co-host and Hall of Famer, Steve Flink. Steve, got a little WTA Finals and some Paris Masters talk. You ready to roll?
Ready to roll, David. A lot going on in the tennis world right now.
Yeah, well, let's start with the WTA Finals, and let's start with the person who that I was obviously so high on throughout the whole year. Had her struggles, as we all know, especially in the slams. But ever since that big win to qualify in Guadalajara, I was hoping this person could play with a freer mind. It looked like she did. That's Maria Sakkari. Had an impressive round robin of 3 matches, beating Pegula, a little revenge from that Guadalajara final. Then Sabalenka and then Ons Jabeur, all in straight sets.
Yeah, it started with a very tight couple of breakers against Pegula, and then she just got better and better after that. Sad part for her is that this can happen at that tournament in the sense that you almost can peak too soon at sometimes in the round robin. She wasn't at her best in the semifinals, so she goes out to Garcia in straight sets, a pretty decisive loss. That's bad luck in a way, because it's hard to win 3 round robin matches like that, like she did. In some cases, players will win 2 out of 3 and then peak for the semis and finals and win the tournament, having lost a round. She didn't have that. Didn't happen to her. Nonetheless, a great ending to the season for her, beyond any doubt.
I was going to say, I think she'll take a lot more positives going into 2023 with the way she finished Guadalajara, and even this tournament, even with the disappointing result in the semis. She beat a lot of top players, especially this past week. I think that will feed her psyche well going into 2023.
Oh, absolutely. No, I mean, she did very well to make it in there, made the most of her opportunities, lost to a better player in the semifinals, but definitely heads into 2023 with a feeling like she's got the wins behind her back. And that's nice. And then, by the way, while we're talking about the WTA Finals and we get to a few other things, let's tip our hats to the 2 players that did make the final, because Garcia and Sabalenka, great week for both of them. They couldn't have asked for more at the end of this year than to have been squaring off in the finals of the year-end championship. So all credit to them.
Absolutely. And yeah, I want to touch on 2 players that you and I specifically called out, saying we're looking forward to seeing how they will play in this tournament. I mean, it couldn't have gone any worse for them. That said, I know one of them wasn't feeling very well, and it's a long year for both, and we'll go into it a little bit. But the 2 players I'm talking about, Jessica Pegula and Coco Gauff, they didn't win a match combined in singles or doubles.
Yeah, David, a very tough pill to swallow for both, considering they come into the tournament as the number 3 and 4 players in the world. So theoretically, you expect to see them qualify for the semifinals. No, not an automatic, but you figure, okay, based on ranking, they could have a decent chance. Nothing went right for either player. But again, in a slightly different way from Sakkari, it can't spoil the many credits they had across the season, and the fact that they did find themselves, in top 4 slots here heading to the tournament. I mean, they both still had terrific seasons. I think maybe Pegula was a bit burnt out by then. Coco just couldn't get on track in this tournament, and then things didn't go right in doubles either. But it doesn't spoil what for both of them were spectacular seasons.
Right. It's kind of the opposite of what Sakkari had, right? Sakkari had a rough year, finished strong.
Right.
Pegula and Coco, they had a good year, did not finish well. I want to give credit to Vanch on Twitter. Coco, it was a long year. She played 104 matches this year. I read this on Twitter: 60 singles, 40 doubles, and 4 mixed. That's a lot of matches for anyone. Long year, like I said. We know there's areas. Go ahead.
So I'm sorry to interrupt. You just made me realize, though. Yeah, Bunch, he bounced that off me, and we had a little text exchange about that, because his point was, did I agree? And I did, that maybe Coco has to rethink, maybe Pegula too. But the point being, if you play that much singles and doubles, can you really keep up that pace? Are you not going to make yourself vulnerable to injuries in the years ahead? That's something that players that are that good in singles and doubles as Pegula and Coco are, they have to think about it. And the priority has to be singles. So it may mean cutting back on some of the doubles at least, and then maybe slightly reshaping their singles schedules so as not to play. You can't go on playing that many matches year in and year out without having something go wrong with your body.
And I know the matches may have been less physical as far as power and rackets and string, but it just, I guess, amazes you that someone like John McEnroe was so good at both and played singles and doubles all the time.
Yeah, looking back, it's remarkable, and he wasn't getting hurt very much either. But John, maybe because of his style of play and attacking as much as he did short points in singles, he loved doubles and therefore didn't practice as much as a lot of the other guys might have.
Right.
For his singles, because the doubles was giving him the practice. So he found
that's what he said. He said he hated practice. The doubles
Yeah.
was his substitute for practice. So.
Yeah, so that worked out for him, and he managed to pull it off. But he was the last of a breed there. I mean, he was preceded by people like John Newcomb and Tony Roach and Stan Smith and Bob Lutz, who all were great doubles players as well as standouts in singles. But those days are over.
Yeah, those days are over. We had mentioned Garcia with her impressive week and her win over Sakari in the semis. Iga Swiatek, right? What a year she had. She lost in 3 sets to Sabalenka. Great win for Sabalenka. Swiatek, 67-9, 8 titles, including 2 slams and 4 WTA 1000s, including that 37-match win streak over the spring and summer. What a year for her, for Iga.
Yeah, it was impossible to sustain the excellent pace she set during the 37-match streak, and so she was a bit more up and down after that, but not a lot. And I thought it was a great thing for women's tennis and for her, David, that she backed up her French Open win after losing early at Wimbledon to come back to win the U.S. Open, take 2 majors, and establish herself as without any dispute, indisputably as the #1 woman player in the world. Too bad for her that she couldn't end the season on a slightly higher note, but Sabalenka played a great match, and Iga just couldn't get going, couldn't stay with her in that 3rd set, which was 6-1 for Sabalenka. Still, again, a spectacular season for Swiatek, and I think she'll pretty much replicate it in the year ahead. That's my guess. She'll have a similarly strong 2023.
Would have been interesting to see if Ash Barty did not retire, what would have happened with Iga's year. I think Iga still would have had a very, very strong year. Would it have been as impressive as what we just listed and talked about? We'll never know. But
well, you know what, David,
on that a little bit.
Yeah, that's fascinating. You put that. As soon as you say it, my thought is most likely Ash wins Wimbledon again, but maybe Iga would have won the 2 majors she got regardless. We'll never know.
Right.
But that could have been such an attractive rivalry for women's tennis. That's what we miss out on. But Ash made a very unusual decision for a player of her stature, and is entitled to it.
Absolutely. Let's move on to the Paris Masters and a player that both of us pointed out again last week. We were curious to see how he responded, and that's Rafa Nadal. First time as a father playing. We really haven't seen vintage Rafa since Wimbledon before he got hurt to Taylor in the quarterfinals. Match Rafa wound up winning, but then had to default in the semis. Rafa was up a set to Tommy Paul, wound up losing in 3 sets. Rafa himself said, he's got to play more on tour. He has to play more sets with these top guys. He knows, he's more aware than anybody else that he's not in top form. And he also knows what he needs to do to get back in top form. And I hope in 2023 his body can hold up and he can get to that level that not only that we're accustomed to seeing, but what he demands of himself and his level of play.
David, it's interesting, all the points you're making, because I'm thinking as you're saying it, listening to Jim Courier on the telecast, and Jim made an interesting point that the good news for Rafa, and this was during the course of his loss to Tommy Paul, but there seems to be no evidence of the foot, which we all were so worried about, and which he had to get injections all through the French to get through Roland Garros and get his 14th title, that the foot seems okay. The foot didn't seem to ever be a problem at Wimbledon or the Open or again here. So at least that seems under control. I don't know about the abdominal. I still don't think he's serving like the real Rafa. I didn't see it against Tommy Paul. I don't see the comfortable extension that he once had. So I'm a bit concerned about that. And you're right. He talked about the need to play more matches. He talked about getting to Italy early to play practice sets, but practice sets is no, you can't really say that it's anything like playing real matches. It just helps you, but it is not the same thing. So it was unfortunate for him that he didn't get more matches in Paris in advance of Turin to give himself a better chance there, because that field is incredibly so much depth in it, and it's going to be such a hard fought event, and both groups of 4 players each are going to be exceedingly strong. So it's going to be hard for Rafa, because indoors, as you know, David, that's where he's always been least comfortable. The surface variation can matter, but regardless of what kind of hard court or carpet is put down or what exactly the conditions are, it's never fully to his liking. And so he doesn't go in, I believe, and he could well prove me wrong, with a lot of optimism into the year-end championships. On the other hand, he's one of these guys who, no matter how many negative comments he makes or how realistic he is, and how often have we heard him use the word doubts? It's one of his favorite words. On the other hand, he overcomes his doubts. So I still think we'll see him go in with the usual fighting spirit in the turn, with the attitude of, okay, let me see if I can win a match. Let me see if I can win 2 matches. Let me see if I can make the semis, and then go from there. So he'll still be hard to beat, but I don't like those conditions. It tends to be kind of fast in Turin and fast indoor courts, and it'll be a tall order for him to play against this field under those circumstances.
And he's never won the year-end finals,
No.
right, Steve, in his career?
No,
So,
never happened. Amazing when you think about it. You know, here's somebody with a record number up there with 22 majors and at least 2 of every Grand Slam event. He joins Djokovic in that department as the only player since Laver to realize that feat. And yet the year-end championships, because it's indoors, and he's commented, David, he did make the comment more than once during his career that he wished they could have had that. And he didn't mean it just selfishly. He just wished that the year-end could have changed surfaces and not always been indoors and maybe been on clay one year. Well, if that had ever happened, you can bet he'd have it. If they played it on clay, guaranteed it's in his collection.
That's true. Fun stat for especially the American tennis fans: for Rafa's 6 losses this year, 3 of the 6 losses have come against ages 25 and under American men. Taylor Fritz at Indian Wells, Francis Tiafoe at the US Open, and Tommy Paul in Paris Masters. Just if I said that would have happened at the beginning of the year, I'm not sure many people would have taken me up on that one. It's just an interesting stat.
It is, but as you pointed out, to get back to your original point, he hasn't been the essential Rafa ever since the French. So
right.
He actually did manage to beat Fritz, avenged it at Wimbledon.
At Wimbledon, yeah.
Which was amazing. But the loss in Indian Wells, he was in terrible shape with the abdominal. He was very honorable and professional to even go out there and compete that day. And then I didn't think he was entirely right at the US Open, taking nothing away from Francis Tiafoe. So some of those losses, you can say, at least to a degree, had something to do with the physical condition of Rafa. But it is interesting that those 3 young Americans would all pick him off.
Yeah. Hey, another player we definitely want to talk about. We knew he was going to lose eventually. We didn't know when, because he was on such a hot streak. Felix Auger-Aliassime, 3 titles in a row, semis in Paris, Masters 1000 event. I mean, no shame in that. This guy's playing some seriously good ball right now.
Well, it's so many weeks in succession, David. It was asking so much of himself to win 3 titles in a row and then go right on to Paris. And he managed to squeak out that match against Emer from a set and 4-1 down, which was a great recovery. Three break points for 5-1. He could have been out of there in straight sets. And then he started playing really well. And to get into he handled Francis Tiafoe easily in the quarters, and then played Holger Rune, who he'd beaten in the finals of Basel in straight sets. This time, Rune was returning much more effectively, and you could see that Felix was just a little bit off. If he'd been in top form versus the Rune that we were seeing emerge so magnificently over the course of this week, they would have had a phenomenal match, probably right down to the wire in 3. But Felix was not up to it. He hit a wall, understandably, David, after winning 3 titles in a row. But you got your wish. You said, I hope he can go deep into that field. He did just that. And so I still think he goes into the year-end championships in Turin feeling very good about himself, David, and not at all depressed about getting beaten in straight sets by Rune. And the other great thing about Felix that is so admirable, he talked about how Rune exposed some of his weaknesses. He didn't just say, "Oh, I was off. I just wasn't up to it today." And I thought that was a good attitude, because it told you that he was going to go to work on those areas, that he was going to pay attention to what Rune exposed. And that's, Felix is just such a professional across the board, and we saw more evidence of that. And he'll have plenty of time. He'll have these to get ready and be rested when he plays his first match, which won't be before the opening Sunday of the event. So he's got plenty of time. He'll be, I think, revitalized by then, and still enormously confident after what he did. I mean, we talked about it the last podcast. The guy never won a tournament before early this year. He breaks that 8 final round loss streak, and then wins now 4 tournaments this year and 3 in a row in the fall. What more could he ask for? So I still think he benefited from playing well in Paris, despite the loss.
I put a poll out on Twitter, and I didn't get an overwhelming response at all, but I'm going to preview a question for you. I don't want an answer now. We'll do it on the year end, similar to what I asked you about Jessica Pegula. Does Felix win a slam in 2023? Something for you to digest when we do our year end segment.
Sure.
It's coming up soon. I can't believe we're almost at the end of the year here. All right, let's talk Novak, because Novak looked really good throughout the event. I'm going to basically pass the torch on to you in the semis and finals. There are certain things I'll chime in on when I want to talk about, but the semi versus Tsitsipas, I'll let you kind of start it out. And I want to talk a little bit about that miraculous tiebreaker that they had in the third set.
Yeah, well, you know what? Novak hadn't lost a set all week, and he was on his winning streak too. He'd won his last 3 tournaments going back to Wimbledon, and 2 in a row in the autumn. And he was really primed for this event. Didn't lose a set coming into Tsitsipas. And that was an interesting match, because he won the first set really comfortably 6-2, and then had a love 30 opening at the start of the second set. And it was clear that if he broke him there, having won 5 games in a row at that stage, he might blitz him. But Stefanos got out of that game, started waving his arms up at the crowd. He really played to the crowd. And I don't say that begrudgingly. I think it was wise, because he wanted to let the crowd know, hey, I could use a little boost here. Help me out. And they did. They really got behind him. And then Novak, you could see that he was a little bit jarred by that. He wasn't angry. He just was a little more low key and a little less confident. And Tsitsipas wins the second set. And then they go to the third, and twice Djokovic had him down 15-40, including at 4-all. And Stefanos got out of it each time to bring that match into a final set tiebreaker, fitting conclusion. And in the tiebreak, David, they're on serve until Stefanos gets the mini break. He's up 4-3 serving.
Yep.
So you figure, boy, he's in good shape. He wins both of these points. It's his match. Djokovic hits an incredible forehand inside-in winner that Tsitsipas challenged, lost the challenge, and then Stefanos made an error off the backhand, and then Djokovic played a typically brilliant defensive point to go to 6-4 that was out of this world.
Out of this world, Steve, by both players.
Yeah, it was. And finally, Stefanos ends up netting a low forehand volley, but understandably, because somehow Djokovic at full stretch had managed to steer his pass down the line without much pace on it, keeping it low enough and Stefanos couldn't handle the volley. But Stefanos looked like he had him 2 or 3 times in that point. And that's 6-4. And then Djokovic closes it out with a nice serve down the tee that set up an overhead winner. So that was a nice recovery from him. And he was, I think, exhilarated, but maybe a bit emotionally exhausted from that too. That had the feeling of a final to it, but he still had one more to go. So he plays.
Yeah, so I want to talk about the tiebreaker a little bit. I mean, down 3-4 in a mini break, he wins 4 points in a row to win the match, like you said. I've said this before on previous podcasts. Novak is so unbelievably good in tiebreakers, and I break it down to 3 reasons why. Is one, in tiebreakers, if you notice, he gets aggressive, but he gets aggressive at big targets. He's never really too close to any of the sideline or the baseline. So he gets aggressive to big targets. That's one. Number 2, he doesn't miss. Okay, he just doesn't miss. Very rarely do you see him make a bad unforced error in the tiebreaker. And 3, what that does it makes his opponents eventually try to go for something a little bit more than what they're accustomed to doing. And they, most of the time, wind up making the error. Those three factors, to me, are why he's so incredibly clean and successful in big time tiebreakers.
Oh, very well described. Listen, David, I didn't count one unforced error in those 11 points. Obviously, he didn't make any over the last 4 points, but Tsitsipas played really good points on his own serve up in the process of building a 3-2 lead, and then Novak brought it back to 3-all, and then Stefanos plays another really good point to go up 4-3. So that proves your point. But in the meantime, he was aggressive. And then when he really had to take it up a notch on both offense and defense from 3-4 down, he did it. Hit the forehand inside in winner, and then played the stupendous defensive point that took him to 6-4. And he did one of the classic Djokovic hand up to the ear moves to let the crowd know, couldn't the applause be a little louder? But it was that the atmosphere for that was electric, as it was for the final. It was just a wonderful weekend in that sense, with two classic hard-fought 3-set struggles involving Djokovic. One a victory for him, and obviously the final a defeat.
Yeah, I'd urge the listeners, if you haven't really noticed it, when you watch Novak play these tiebreakers, look at the three factors I've talked about. Especially, he goes aggressive, but at big targets, and that's such a good lesson to learn for every level, especially in tight moments. You don't have to go for lines in the tightest moment to be aggressive. You can do it in other ways, and Novak does that so well.
He does, but then if he sees an opening that he's confident he can make, a shot that for somebody else might seem like a small target, like the forehand inside in winner that got him back to 4-all. It was right on the line. Tsitsipas challenging, but it wasn't a reckless shot, David. It was one that well calculated on Novak's part. He saw the opening, and he'll make that shot 9 out of 10 times.
Correct. All right, so let's get to the final. He's up 3-1 in the final set. Novak is. Is there anything you want to talk about before we get to that?
Oh, yeah.
I mean, generally, go ahead, Steve.
Yeah, absolutely. Because here was the sort of the analogy, the similarity between the semifinal and the final is that Djokovic loses only 5 points on his serve in the whole first set, and 21 out of 26 points. He gets an early break when Holger, who is understandably apprehensive, a little over anxious, serves a couple of double faults and helps Novak out. And then Novak took complete control of that set in very reminiscent of what he'd done against Tsitsipas. Completely all controlled aggression, so measuring his shots perfectly. He's in control of the match. First game, second set, he gets to love 40 on Rune's serve. And again, you had the feeling there, if he breaks here, this match could be over. Not that he was necessarily going to blitz through the set 6-2 or 6-1, but that the one break was going to be good enough. And he missed a backhand down the line pass, not the easiest one of all time, but the opening was there. He'd normally make it. Then a forehand return off his second serve where he was leaning to that side and ready for it, but he netted it. And then he missed again. He didn't miss, but he hit an overhead that he didn't put away, and Rune managed to get it back deep and then won it on the next shot. So basically, those are 3 points that look like he probably could have won any of the three and didn't. And when Rune got out of that game to get the hold there and keep himself from going down an immediate break in the second set, you could see his mood shift. You could see the excitement in him, the exuberance, and you could see the disappointment in Novak, because he surely was thinking about the day before and realizing that's where he got into trouble against Stefanos, is that if he could have just secured that early break, the whole complexion of the match would have been different. So that then Novak plays maybe his only bad service game of the match in the second game to lose his serve, sits up, and Rune serves out to 3-love and eventually wins the set 6-3. That was a big swing, those first couple of games of the second set, between Djokovic being in utter control and Rune getting his teeth into the contest. Then we go to that stage of the match that you just mentioned, where early in the third, Djokovic seemed to regroup and seemed to be back in control, and he gets a double fault again out of Holger Rune on the break point that puts him up 3-1. But meantime, he's signaling to the umpire that he's going to need the trainer. You sense that something was going on in that game that was putting extra pressure on him in his mind to make sure that he held for 4-1 before he saw the trainer. And he got to 30 love and served and volleyed and was a little unlucky because Rune's passing shot clipped the net cord and stayed in the court, bounded. Novak had no play on the volley. And then he got to 40-30 and came in on an approach that wasn't good enough. And then at deuce, he got too cute on a forehand volley and didn't make the drop volley as he should have, and then had a follow-up high backhand volley that he didn't put away, and Rune passed him. So that was a disappointing game because he looked like at 30-11, 40-30, he's going to go to 4-1. He sees the trainer to deal with his left quad. And David, I should mention now, both days he kept stretching out that left quad time and time again. Not the way you might see him in a long 5-setter in Australia where we get to early in the 5th and he's stretching it out once or twice and you get it because the match is
for cramping. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, but more, just to avoid cramping, but also just because they've been out there so long and just a few stretches and that's it. Here was constant stretching almost after every changeover. So I think, but then interestingly enough, once the trainer came and rubbed it a little bit, he seemed okay the rest of the way. He didn't stretch it anymore. I think there was reassurance in seeing the trainer, and the trainer probably telling him, you're not going to do any damage to it. You're going to be okay. And who knows what else he told him, but clearly he didn't need to get it wrapped or anything like that. And then he started to play well again, but of course he'd given up the service break. So now we go to, he keeps holding for 3-2, 4-3, and then he had a deuce game, and Rune came up with a couple of great shots when serving at 3-4, a couple of backhand down the line winners that could have given Djokovic, if he'd won those points, break points to go up 5-3. Rune came through in the clutch there, held on. He gets to 4-all, then they go to 5-all. And again, Novak has 30 love on his serve at 5-all. So you're thinking, okay, the worst he's going to be is 6-5, and maybe he breaks, or the worst that happens is he goes to a tiebreaker. Well, Rune won 4 points in a row, a couple of them on Novak mistakes, including the break point. So now he's serving for the match, and that, of course, was the highlight of the match. 6 deuces.
I mean, that 6-5 game that you're about to talk about, it was about the length of what this entire podcast episode was going to be. I mean, it was incredible. The game.
It was, and some great stuff from both players. Yes, some tension. They both showed some frailty at times, but they also produced some magnificent points. But especially,
I think it was at the 5th deuce. I think it was the 5th deuce point at that 6-5 game. That there was a point that you can go back on any social media channel. There was a point, to me, there were some amazing points between Djokovic and Tsitsipas. This was the point I'm referring to, could have been the point of the tournament. It was unbelievable. Like you said, both players were playing really, really well.
Yeah, I think you're talking about the point where Novak had come in. Yeah, he comes in. And Rune hits a great lob so deep that Novak has to retreat to the baseline, hit the overhead on the bounce. Then Novak ends up drop shotting, bringing Rune in, and Novak now lob volleys over Rune. And then Rune wheels around and hits a pretty good pass, and Djokovic lunges for the forehand volley winner. That was the point of the match. Point of the
tournament.
Even though he does all that, and he played points like that in the course of that game, then he'd get a little tight when he had the 6 break points. 2 or 3 of them he was tight and surprising misses. But the resilience of both players in that game was remarkable. I had the feeling, David, I don't know whether you did watching it, and Rune said later that he was kind of jumping out of his skin. Part of it was tension, but he also was physically drained too. And I had the feeling that if Djokovic gets it into a breaker, it might be a 7-2 breaker for Djokovic. I just felt like
I'm not gonna bet against Djokovic in a tight breaker against anybody.
Well, the combination of him being the great clutch player in the breakers, and also Rune being spent, because I think he had thrown everything he could into the 6-5 game. If he doesn't serve it out there, and Djokovic had finally gotten that break, I think he would have finally hit that emotional wall himself. We didn't get to see it, but it was still such a great final game of the match.
He saved 6, like you said. I want to emphasize this.
Yeah,
Rune saved 6 break points. I mean, this game was filled with incredible amount of tension on both sides.
And Novak was looking at him a few times. He had that wry grin on his face. I think that in some ways he was stepping out of himself at certain times, in the sense that appreciating the moment. Even though it didn't go his way, he admired the kid's gumption, David, and he made clear about that after the match. He said, I didn't like losing to you, but he made it clear how much he admires him as a kid and as a young player. And he sees a lot of himself. He sees the 19-year-old Novak in Holger Rune. There's no doubt about it. The gumption that I mentioned, and just the sense of self and being respectful of your revered opponent, but not giving him too much respect. Just going out there prepared to win. And that's what was so interesting about this match. Djokovic definitely should have closed it in my mind, but a lesser man than Rune would not have been able to take advantage of it. They wouldn't have found a way to win either. They might have finally cracked themselves. He would not crack. And that was the story of his week, which of course began with saving 3 match points against Stan Wawrinka. Amazing.
Yeah. Unbelievable. You see that in sports a lot of times. You have that one tough match, one tough day, but if you get through it, it propels you into doing even better, where you think you're not playing with house money, but just, I can't believe I got through it. I'm still alive. Let's keep going. I want to give stats on both Novak and Rune, and then I want to pass it on for you to talk about it. Novak, right? He's only played 10 tournaments. He's missed 2 slams and 4 Masters events. He missed out on 2,000 points in spite of winning Wimbledon, and yet he still finished in the top 8. Your thoughts?
Well, I think that just shows you how great he is. I mean, he was deprived of the 2,000 points, as you mentioned, which would have meant that he would have finished the year almost surely in the top 5. Now, I don't think that's going to be possible, even if he wins Turin. But it shows you that once he got his year going, David, it wasn't easy initially, the first few tournaments, in Dubai and then Monte Carlo, and he wasn't really himself. And then slowly got going on the clay. But from the time that he, winning Rome and losing the great master Carlos in Madrid. And I mean, he from that point on, the quarters of the French and then winning Wimbledon and then the rest of the year, he's been pretty much the standard Novak. Yes, he would have liked to have won that final over Rune. It's a slight setback, but not anything that I think is going to linger in his mind very long. And so, yes, to play so many fewer events than any of the other top players, and he'll still end up finishing the year, as you said, somewhere in the top 8. It'll depend on how he does in Turin. Maybe he can climb up to 6 or wherever, but remarkable achievement given how few opportunities he had to garner points.
And to our title holder, Holger Rune, he started the year outside the top 100. He's now top 10. He's the first player with 5 consecutive wins against top 10 opponents in a single tournament. That's really, really impressive. Your thoughts, and players are going to definitely have to deal with this kid going forward.
Well, let's, look at some of those guys, and among the 5, Hubie Hurkacz, who's awfully tough to beat indoors, with his big serve and aggression. And he beat, obviously he was beating Carlos. He had him a set and they're going to the tiebreak in the second. Carlos had to retire in the middle of the tiebreak. Bad luck for Alcaraz, but he was being outplayed, David. It was going to be he was going to be awfully hard pressed to find a way out of that match, the way Rune was playing. And then Felix, who of course was the hottest player on tour with the 3 straight titles. So, and he caps it all off by beating Djokovic. So, I mean, all of those wins over those top 10 guys were really impressive. And he just seemed to get better and better in many ways. His confidence just grew as the week went on. And so he's now moved to another level. He's gone to number 10 in the world, and he's the first alternate for Turin, which means if Fritz or anybody else got hurt, any of the players have to pull out, he's in the tournament. But regardless, the fact that he finds himself in that territory, I mean, I'm very excited about the prospects for him next year. Here are going to be these 2 19-year-olds who are both going to turn 20 next year, obviously, but the chance that they're going to have to build their own little rivalry, but also to threaten the more established figures in the top 10 time and again. I'm excited about it because I don't think it's an accident that Rune is where he is, and he'll keep climbing.
Oh, absolutely. Hey, and how much, I know we're talking about the WTA Finals and Paris Masters, 2 huge events. You also know how much I love collegiate tennis and also the slightly lower levels. I hate even using that term because it discredits it a little bit. Everyone here is so good, but for you tennis fans, especially American tennis fans, 2 other title holders this week, and it's really exciting to see One played college, the other didn't. The collegiate player was Ben Shelton. He beat his American tennis pro colleague Chris Eubanks 7-6, 7-5 in Charlottesville. We've talked about Ben before. He's not going to be playing too many more challengers, I don't think, in the future. The other player on the female side, Katie McNally, won a tournament in Midland, Michigan. She's now in the top 100. You all know Katie from the Coco, playing doubles with Coco Gauff. You also remember Katie in singles. She played Serena Williams tough in the U.S. Open just a few years back. I know Katie's coach, Kevin O'Neill, great guy. I'm looking for a bright future for both those players in singles, and both Katie McNally and Ben Shelton.
Yeah, I mean, those are timely victories for both. And I agree with you. Katie is not just a doubles player. She is in the top 20 in doubles. But I think maybe with some luck, we're going to see her eventually get to that level in singles as well. So nice win for her. And Shelton, we talked about him over the summer, how impressive he was. And this was something he needed, because since the summer, he'd had a few tough losses he'd had to endure. But, he beat Eubanks in the finals, which is a good win. I watched Eubanks playing Sinner at the U.S. Open this year, and I was very impressed. And earlier in the tournament, he only lost, I think, one set in the tournament. Most of his wins were in straight. And he beat, among others, Brandon Holt, Tracy Austin's son, who had the great U.S. Open. So that was a very uplifting week for Shelton, and carries him to 128 in the world. And I think we're going to see him. He'll be inside that top 100 very, very soon.
And again, I mean, you just the level is so high. Steve mentioned Brandon Holt. You remember Holt from the U.S. Open? He beat Taylor Fritz, the U.S. Open, and you know how great of a year Taylor's had. So good news on the American front with those. I don't know if I say young pros. I mean, Katie's been around a while. Ben played college for 2 years, but looking forward to seeing both of them play. Katie is young, but she's been on tour for quite a bit. So with that, I think we're going to post a big time guest next week. Is that what we're going to do, Steve? I know we already recorded it. We're not going to spoil the name here yet, but
no, we're not.
Post that one.
But I know the listeners will enjoy it. Just one last stat that I'd like to throw in, because you enjoy these so much, David, to put the Holger Rune victory over Djokovic a little bit more in perspective. Novak came onto the court. Now just listen to this one for a second. He comes onto the court having won 891 matches and lost only 38 when he had won the first set. So almost at the 96% level, highest in the Open era. 38 times in his entire career had he lost a match after winning the first set. And that included 30 Masters 1000 finals where he had not lost after winning the first set. And Rune somehow managed to come from a set. That shows you what remarkable, because he is without a doubt the best front runner I've ever seen. And Rune somehow toppled him.
I did see the 30-0 mark. I did see that one. That was incredible. Those stats that you just said are ridiculously good. With that said, this was fun, Steve. Again, we have a big time guest that I think we're going to post next week. And then the following week, we will wrap up the results in Turin. So we got a good couple of weeks coming up. Steve, this was a lot of fun. We had a good we had a good week that we just recapped, both on the WTA tour and on the ATP tour. This was fun. Thanks, Steve.
David, I enjoyed it. Thank you.